It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rob. Welcome to my State of the Dungeon address. This is going to cover the events that took place on the 17th of June, 2021. And the game is Mighty Protectors. All players were in attendance. The party was dispatched to the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico to investigate some strange ziggurats that had suddenly sprouted out of the ground. No idea how they got there. Nobody was seen building them. They just appeared. And as another phenomenon, any kind of signal, radio, Wi-Fi, anything, blacked out after a short radius away from it. Short in this means, a half a mile. And beyond that, it gets weaker and weaker until you get about a mile and a half out. In which case, then the interference ends. So the group was sent in to investigate because of their myriad different abilities to investigate and hopefully not get killed. So they went to the ziggurat on a Navy boat, nice destroyer, and they were sent to the peninsula to investigate the ziggurats on a Chinook, which is an old cargo helicopter that doesn't rely on advanced avionics, so it is capable of flying with a pilot who knows how to fly a helicopter, and even if its electronics aren't fully functional or functional at all, really. The group got on. Those who could fly had the option to do so, but Muscles enjoyed his opportunity for not being in a cramped, to him, crew area, so he went weightless and grabbed onto the strut of the helicopter and was able to fly that way. And also Cygos decided she was going to fly. The rest of the group, including those who could otherwise fly, decided to stay on board the Chinook for whatever reasons. So they were flying in, and Cygos decided, since she was faster than the Chinook by quite a bit, she would fly ahead and scout it out. She saw the circle of the Mexican guard around the ziggurat. They were holding out at about an 800-foot perimeter around it, out of radio ability, but still far enough away that they felt reasonably safe. They had some tanks, they had some other vehicles, and the party had been given a basically open check to do whatever they needed to do. The Mexican government was not going to interfere, and they were to figure out whatever these things were, determine if they were harmful, and if they were, maybe try to do something about it. So as she was flying over, she decided she was going to do a life sense check. And the life sense picked up all of the guards. She rolled very well. And it also picked up from the ziggurats a powerful life force. It was more of a distributed force than a single force, but she was just detecting very strong force all over the surface of the ziggurats. And these ziggurats were towering up 250 and 270 feet up into the air. They were not the same height. They were not quite the same structure. One had more tiers. The taller one had a few more tiers than the other one. They had carvings all over their faces. The rest of the group flew in, landed around the perimeter of where the Mexican guard was, and wouldn't approach any closer. That was the orders that the pilot was given to get them to that point. So from that point, the group walked across the field, and it was also around this point that Cygos went astral as well, because she can now make an astral duplicate of herself, which has all the abilities she has, so it can appear visible, so she can have an intangible body double flying around. It's like a permanent mirror image in a way. It's kind of a neat trick. And
you forgot when I was checking it out that it zapped me.
Getting there.
And
she did her life force check, and all of a sudden there was this crimson arc between the ziggurats, and a powerful blast shot out, which did not connect fully with her, and was rolled really badly by me. So it didn't maybe feel as impressive as it potentially could have, but it zapped at her, and she rolled with it quite well, and with her power armor, she didn't take any real damage. But it's quite clear that there is an element of danger, and the Mexican guards started fleeing when it became all too clear that thing could blast any one of them. So they were kind of in a rout. The group was like, okay, well, this is what we get paid to do, sort of. So they went over to the ziggurats, and they started to explore them. No further blasts were had, and the group handled approach differently. Several of them started scaling the ziggurat. Muscle started bounding up the ziggurat with his super leap ability. Rook, once he saw Muscles bounding and figured it was safe, flew up alongside of him. I can just imagine Deadpool's opposite going, minimum effort. But the rest of the group was going up as well. When Muscles got up to the top, he saw the top of it was completely flat. All of the horizontal surfaces were completely smooth, fitted stone. No mortar could be seen. It looked like the stone was holding together by gravity and engineering, really. All of the vertical faces and planes on the ziggurats, however, were carved. They got to see artistry that looked like it was in Mesoamerican, Incan Mayan. Lots of images of animals and humans in Congress. People eating with the animals dancing with humans, talking amongst themselves. And it was a lot of the native animals like jaguars and coyotes and falcons and things like that, bears. So they noted that, and all got up to the top. And Psyghost went astral, as I said, and she looked, and she saw, with the, at this point I pulled the player aside, and I told her, you know, when you were watching Adam back at the Gifted Con, he was so powerful psychically, you could see him through intervening objects between you and him in the astral space? She's like, yeah. Well, you can see this thing. It is about 1,500 feet tall. It is buried in the ground. What you see sticking up as ziggurats are its shoulders. Its head is just below the surface of the sand. And it is waking up. Uh-huh. And it's looking at you. Oh. So that was eye-opening. And it attempted to psychically contact her. Now, this thing has a vast psychic ability. Psyghost is a very potent psychic. With her abilities, she may not have the greatest range of abilities, like she's not Professor Xavier, but her psi bolts are powerful. Her telepathy is pretty good, and she can astrally project, which she can do while she's conscious and moving around. I mean, she's got some great powers. She was not on a scale to receive this kind of blast, but her exceptional willpower allowed her to keep her head straight even in the force of this onslaught. She wasn't taking any damage, but she was risking being just kind of locked down from the force of this power. And it didn't seem like it was directed as an attack. She could have avoided that. She could have, resisted that or something. This wasn't an attack. It was some other form of contact. Eventually she realized it was trying to communicate with her, but it didn't speak her language. It didn't speak on any way that she could connect with it. The intelligence was completely alien to her. Kind of disturbing. So she pops back, and the others are like, well, what's going on? Because she looks stunned in the physical sense too. And she's like, guys, we're not where you think we are. That's a big thing below us. At this point, the group was trying to get Dr. Terrible to turn his car armor into a steam shovel to try to dig under the ziggurat. And they had tried prizing the blocks apart. It seemed like that Muscles, when he tried that, got zapped pretty hard. They first tried to get Dr. Terrible to create a pneumatic pry bar to get in. That broke trying that, but he has a potential problem of his gadgets breaking on him, so that's wasn't proof positive. The stuff only had the structural integrity of his car. He was looking at the tank longingly out in the field with the Mexican army. So then he went down under Muscle's direction to try making a steam shovel out of his car armor, because he can repurpose his gear almost infinitely as long as he has an idea and it's at least remotely possible. Unfortunately, his whole power plant was the combustion engine of the car, not the most powerful thing in the world. So he was just getting that rig going when all of a sudden the ground started trembling, and so did the ziggurats. Everyone started getting shaken, and the thing started to rise up out of the ground. This took a while, so the group had plenty of time to react. Muscles grabbed Dr. Terrible out of his armor before it got pulled under the undertow of the sand, filling the cavity that the thing was in, pulled him up and away. The rest of the group pretty much tried to skedaddle. They realized that this didn't seem optimal with most of their abilities at the moment, at least. So they pulled back and away. Muscles flew up, and he had a plan. He was going to go down and punch it, because that's a muscle plan. When you are that strong, that seems to be the plan. So, unfortunately, because this thing, by the time he came up with this plan, it was about 800 feet high and still digging out of the ground. He had to make a cool test to be brave enough to punch an 800-foot tall giant. And actually, once its legs got out, it was 1,200 feet tall. He failed. Badly. So, his duplicate, yes, he actually had a duplicate, punched him and refused to fight it. So they had a crisis. So as they were falling, his duplicate tangled up in the propulsion belt, anti-gravity belt that Muscles wears, and sent him flying. The duplicate, however, dropped straight onto the thing. And I let him punch it. And it really hurt. Not the thing. The thing seemed to absorb all of the kinetic energy from his punch. However, it caused a ripple effect that cascaded back as a powerful psychic blast that not only hit the duplicate solidly, it created a clinging cocoon of psychic fire that was burning him literally from the inside out. So he neutralized the duplicate before he could take any more damage, which stopped the pain. But he then became very dispirited at the thought of trying to deal with this thing, since punching it wasn't seeming to be effective. Not everything can be handled by punching, I guess. So, at this point, the group was like, we need advice, we need help. We don't know what to do. So they sent Rook outside of the dead zone to try to contact Veronica, who seems to be one of the smartest people they know, hoping she had connections and answers who could help them out. So he flew off, he called her up. His flight is quite fast, and he was able in just a few rounds to get far enough away. Also, how much fun is it to track exactly how long it would take him to cover a mile? He flew fast. He eventually got the call off. Veronica's like, hi. He's like, this is what's happening. Here's the video. We're kind of in trouble. And she's like, well, I'm not a specialist in Mesoamerican history. I can't tell you anything about the gods of the Mayans or the Incans or anything. Of course she said it in a proper British accent. But I don't know what it is. You guys are supposed to be really smart and have really flexible powers. Try to figure something out, and I will try to get you help. But I wasn't really prepared for a 1,200-foot giant, so you guys are kind of my best operatives right now. See what you can do. Okay, turned around, flew back, and told everybody she trusts us. So at this point, Muscles has dropped off Dr. Terrible over by the rest of the group. And while they were waiting for Rook to get back, Bulwark had this idea. He's like, we need to have some way of communicating with it. Well, the communication thing became kind of mainlined really quickly. The thing started to give off an emanation of power, a sphere of distortion around it, until finally crackling bolts of energy flew down from its eyes and blasted into the soil and sand of the desert in front of it, which was facing away from the shore, so it's inland. And it blasted several large symbols into the ground. Now, because he's a colossal nerd and brain, Bulwark looked at that and goes, That's Wingdings. It's a font. So he pulled out his phone to reverse engineer the sound, because few people can actually write in Wingdings. It may be a font, but it's gibberish for most people. And he found out that it was a name, Huatzacotl. And they're like, that sounds like one of those Aztec or Mayan god things. Interesting. Well, if it speaks in Wingdings, I have a hard time saying that straight. We should try to communicate with it. Dr. Terrible, can you make a holographic projector that can project an image in Wingdings? Sure, give me time. Now, at this point, Dr. Terrible did not have his vehicle anymore. He did not have his Luckar that his car armor was made out of. However, he did convince Muscles to detour him over by one of those Mexican tanks. And he got into it, because they failed to keep him out. He's a slithery little eel when he wants to be. And he basically took it over. And he turned it into robot armor again. He's not the most creative guy. But, yeah, he turned it into something that looks like it crawled out from the Transformers, except much cruder. If he had time, he could have probably made it look like, if you followed the Transformers movies, Brawl, who was a Decepticon that was a tank. It would have worked. But as it was kind of crude. And this was the vehicle that he wanted him to turn into a holographic projector. He's like, I'll see what I can do. So he started transforming it, basically, by using his fluent gadgeteering ability. And what he managed to do was he used the diesel engine to power the thing. So he had enough power. But the only thing he had for projection were headlights, so he had to gadgeteer those. And he was asking, well, what am I going to project? For once, Bulwark was completely without words. He had no idea what to ask. The group head shedded for a moment. They're like, what do you want? Communicate. Let's find out what it wants. But here's the thing. By this time, it turned around ponderously and started walking towards the coast in pretty much a direct line for their ship. The ship noticed that and started getting out of the way. But the group is like, it's going towards the water. That's maybe not good. So it's only taking one stride every 5 seconds it takes to extend its leg and step. But that step is covering about 200 feet. So it's moving at a good pace for that size. And it's just... Finally, they get the signal. Unfortunately, his aim isn't the best. And Dr. Terrible projects it on the thing's retreating backside. Bulwark bulks up, goes full tangible, and he grabs the back end of the tank and slides it around in an arc until the symbol is in front of it. The thing ponders the Wingdings for a moment, and then keeps going. The hologram dies out relatively quickly. They end up having to use one of Bulwark's gadgets as a power source, his shock gloves that he has. So the message didn't last terribly long, and the thing didn't slow down, and it didn't try to converse further. And as it was going out, it wasn't just following the shallow basin, it was actually sinking through the floor of the bay and going down into the water rather quickly, quicker than one would think somebody who was following along the coast would go. But he starts sinking very quickly. So at this point, the group was really contemplating what they could do. Muscles couldn't punch it. He didn't have any ideas. Rook couldn't communicate with it because it was blocking out all of his communications abilities, although he felt that he could track it by its absence of signal that it was projecting. Bulwark had no new ideas. All they could do is just let it go. Ghost actually did at one point, and I forgot to say this, she tried to communicate with it astrally, because it apparently could see her astral form. And she reached out to touch its finger, but it was only interested in going bing, and she dodged. It didn't hit her. But its finger was the size of a metro bus. So she got out of the way. She didn't feel like getting crushed this time. Probably for the best. But she got one last psychic message back in return. Nobody else could get this. She received it. And she rolled really well to decipher it. So she got the impression, carved through to the basic core of her language center, the concepts, they come. Who's coming? She doesn't know. Under what context? A threat? Something to prepare for? Something to worry about? More so than they already have? They don't know. But it kept going out until it eventually was completely submerged. They went back to the destroyer. They had to give the tank back. Dr. Terrible was crushed. But yeah, he broke it. So there's that. It's worth scrap right now. But he can't tinker with it anymore. And it was out of gas. So they take him, everybody gets back, and the Chinook lands back, and they start thinking about what to do. First thing, now they can communicate again. So of course they go back to tell Veronica everything. And they give a situation report. As of right now, the situation seems to be back to normal-ish. Knowing that thing's around is not normal, but okay. They looked up the foremost expert on Mesoamerican culture, native Mesoamerican culture, and they talked to a doctor who was in Colombia, and he told them, of course, that he didn't believe in their gods, so the fact that they could show him imagery through Rook, because he can do all that fun stuff, they saw that and it just shook him to his core, because he just believed that all that was myth. It was heroes of the Incans or Mayans or Aztecs that they basically deified. And as a result, weren't really gods. Now that they had proof that there's this 1,200 foot tall, vastly powerful being with a conscience so alien they could only barely grasp its outer ring of consciousness, they started pumping him for questions, and he's like, okay, I'm having to throw away all of my years of assumptions in their culture and start over again, that they were right. Give me a second. But he did give them some surmises. They asked him why he might have gone to the water, and according to the legend, he stood as a protector against the sea god who would send in hurricanes off of the Caribbean to punish the land, and that's why a lot of those cultures used stone structures despite the fact that wood was plentiful. They did that to basically weather the horrible temperature, so they trusted in stone more. So they thought, okay, so the sea god is, yeah, it's an enormous fish with many, many mouths, and it would be absolutely vast, capable of swallowing entire villages at a gulp. And they're like, oh, great! Can't wait for this! So they have some things to think about. But they were being recalled. They were sent to New Orleans to get onto the plane as fast as possible to get back up to Albany. There is a big deal they have to help with. Okay. Well, they were excited at the opportunity to at least get a sniff of New Orleans. As a matter of fact, several of them have abilities that allow them to kind of go off on a mini shopping spree, wolfing down local cuisine via Saigo, sending her astral image along to follow the group while she vanished physically and went nomming on beignets and gumbo and jambalaya. Sentinel also dashed off. If he decided he wanted to run, he could beat the plane. He couldn't travel that far, but still, he's pretty zippy when he wants to be. And he bought booze for everybody. It's nice he was thinking of everybody. But he knows of a place, and he went to that place and got the drink that he wanted, and bottoms up. So the group had an in-flight drink, something rum, I suspect, and they got on a fast flight to take them back up to Albany, where they were immediately brought back to the nest. Once there, they met up with Veronica and several of the other gifted that they had met before, including the two girls representing Shadow and Light, Chelsea and... oh, what's her name? Begins with an M. But anyhow, those two, who had kind of slipped off. They weren't seen as very reliable anyhow, and they didn't seem like they were really committed to the cause. But they're back. Also, the friendly fellow that they met who's capable of transforming himself into animals, he was there too. And so was Dorman. They were very happy to see Dorman, because last they saw he had been spirited out of Gifted Con, and the last they had heard he was found in some sort of a trance in a hotel room in Berlin. But he'd been recovered, and he had passed his psych tests and was now back at the nest. So they were very happy to see him. He's probably one of the better ones of the lads they found in Colorado, all those gifted who were friends. So Veronica told them what was going on. She had gotten a glimpse of what was going to happen thanks to Clayton looking in his book. And apparently, there's a grave threat to the delegates of the United Nations that they might have a chance of intervening at. She doesn't know the nature because the book was surprisingly indistinct about that. Just literally putting down the facts that a swarm of battle-suited soldiers were going to come out of the subways around the United Nations and swarm the defenses, and that a group of powerful gifted, led by an Alpha class gifted, was going to attempt to take the United Nations delegates hostage. Now, understanding that the United Nations delegates are not the most powerful political people in their country, that's still an awful lot of clout and could sow any amount of chaos across the globe. So, it was kind of an important deal. So they were, once they got back, they are the point folks. They are the ones who aren't really supposed to worry necessarily as much about the battle-suited goons. Veronica's putting people in place. Basically, everybody else who's on the team is getting sent there to try to help fight off this army of battle-suited goons who are just, well, basically there to cover the abduction of the United Nations Council. And the group has to deal with that Alpha and 4 gifted. The only thing they know for sure is that one of them looks like he is completely covered in things like mines, they looked like to her glance. Another one that was flying looked like he was glowing with a bright light. And that's what they have to deal with. Now, at this point, unfortunately, it was still a little early in the night. We could have gotten a little further, but several of the members of the group had to leave. So the rest of the folk who were there got to talk a little bit with Veronica, ask her some questions. But for the most part, we ended a little early, because for this next session, we want everybody who can be here to be here, because it's going to get kind of intense. You thought dealing with a 1,200-foot giant was intense. No, this is going to get fun. They get to play with all those powers and see how good they've shored up their defenses and everything. Should be fun. So, until next time, next episode, stay tuned, true believers, as we get ready to unleash another episode of Mighty Protectors. Until that time, roll dice, stay safe, play well, and farewell.